The East Coast of America. 4,000 miles of coastline stretching from the rocky shores of Maine down to the warm waters of the Florida Keys. Lighthouses perched on granite cliffs. 4th of July parades through towns with white picket fences. The golden leaves of the Appalachian Mountains in October. This is the version of the East Coast that makes it into the travel magazines. But tucked between those famous skylines and tourist beaches are places that most Americans have forgotten exist. Towns where the population has dropped by 90%, where the nearest grocery shop is a 45-minute drive over 2 mountains, where a fire has been burning underground for more than 60 years, where entire islands are sinking into the sea and the median age of the remaining residents is over 60. These are not ghost towns from the Old West. These are communities on America's East Coast, some within driving distance of Washington, D.C., that are vanishing right now in real time. These are the 15 loneliest towns on the East Coast of America. If you find stories like these as fascinating as we do, hit that subscribe button so you never miss one. Now, let us begin. Number 15. We begin our countdown on Moose Island in Washington County, Maine, in a place called Eastport. It is the easternmost city in the continental United States. Every single morning, the people of Eastport are the first in America to see the sunrise. But it also means they are at the very edge of the country, and the country has largely forgotten they are there. In 1833, Eastport was the second busiest trading port in the United States, behind only New York City. By 1886, 13 sardine factories ran day and night. The population peaked at 5,311 in 1900. Then, the fishing industry collapsed. The factories closed one by one. Young people left and never came back. Today, roughly 1,288 people live in Eastport. The median age is 62.9 years. The elementary school was built to hold 250 students. It now has 86. Eastport sits in Washington County, one of the poorest parts of the entire United States, where opioid deaths have torn through families and left grandparents raising grandchildren. The nearest major city is a 3-hour drive. In winter, the restaurants close, the streets empty. And the first sunrise in America lands on a town where almost nobody is awake to see it. A town at the edge of America watching the sunrise alone is poignant enough. But the next place on our list is floating in the middle of the Chesapeake Bay, slowly vanishing beneath the water. Number 14. Smith Island, Maryland. The last inhabited offshore island in the state, with no road connecting it to the mainland. It sits roughly 10 miles west of Crisfield and can be reached only by boat. The island is a collection of marshes and small islands, split into 3 communities: Ewell, Rhodes Point, and Tylerton. English settlers arrived in the 17th century. At its peak in the early 1900s, roughly 800 people called Smith Island home. Today, around 200 remain. The Army Corps of Engineers estimates that over 3,300 acres have been eroded in the past 150 years. Only 900 acres are still habitable. The Maryland Department of Natural Resources has warned that without intervention, Smith Island could be completely underwater by 2100. The men here are watermen, crabbing in summer and oystering in winter. The school bus is a boat. The ambulance is a helicopter. There is no crime, no police station, and no alcohol for sale. Mary Ada Marshall, a resident who bakes the famous Smith Island cake, Maryland's official state dessert, once told a reporter that faith is the government of this island. When the state offered buyout money after Superstorm Sandy in 2012, the islanders refused. They formed a group called Smith Island United and told the government to invest in saving the island instead. An island where the school bus floats and the ambulance flies is extraordinary. But the next place on our list is firmly on the mainland, in one of the wealthiest counties in Florida. And yet it has been in a state of financial emergency for more than 30 years. Number 13. Pahokee, Florida. The name comes from the Creek language and means grassy waters. It sits on the southeastern shore of Lake Okeechobee in Palm Beach County. Yes, that Palm Beach County. But Pahokee has been in a state of financial emergency since 1994. In the 1930s, Pahokee was known as the winter vegetable capital of the world. Trains of refrigerated cars rolled out to northern markets day and night. Then sugarcane replaced the hand-picked vegetables. The work became mechanized. In 2009, the sugar plant shut down entirely. Unemployment exceeds 25%. The poverty rate sits at roughly 32%. A fifth of the population has simply left in the past 15 years. But Pahokee's sorrow goes deeper than economics. In 1928, the Okeechobee hurricane killed over 2,500 people in this region. Most were black migrant workers buried in mass unmarked graves. The town's high school has sent more than a dozen players to the NFL, including Anquan Bolden and Fred Taylor. Football, the locals say, is the only way out. James Patterson once visited Pahokee for a documentary and asked a single question: what the hell happened here? Nobody could give him a good answer. A forgotten town surrounded by extraordinary wealth is troubling enough. But the next place was once home to Campbell's Soup, RCA Victor, and the largest shipyard in the world. Today, it is one of the poorest cities in America. Number 12. Camden, New Jersey. Directly across the Delaware River from Philadelphia. This is the city where Walt Whitman lived the last 19 years of his life. During the Second World War, the New York Shipbuilding Corporation was the largest shipyard in the world, employing 47,000 workers. At its peak in 1950, roughly 125,000 people called Camden home. Then every major employer left. The shipyard closed in 1967. The population dropped to roughly 80,000. 3 of the city's mayors in the past 30 years have gone to prison for corruption. By 2006, more than half of Camden's residents live below the poverty line, making it the poorest city of its size in the entire nation. In 2012, Camden had the highest crime rate of any city in the country. The entire police department was disbanded and replaced by a county force. More than 3,000 houses sit vacant. And yet, across the river, the glittering skyline of Philadelphia is close enough to touch. A city where you can see one of America's greatest skylines but cannot afford to eat is a particular kind of cruelty. But the next place was once considered the most beautiful city on the Hudson River. Number 11. Newburgh, New York, roughly 60 miles north of Manhattan. This is the city where George Washington established his headquarters at the end of the Revolutionary War. By the 1950s, Newburgh was a prosperous city with a population of roughly 31,000. Then came urban renewal, the federal program of demolishing old neighborhoods and replacing them with modern housing blocks. In Newburgh, this meant bulldozing much of the historic waterfront district. Grand Victorian homes were knocked down. In their place went brutalist concrete towers. The character of the town was gutted in a single decade. Today, the poverty rate exceeds 28%. Entire blocks of Victorian mansions sit boarded up. The waterfront is largely derelict. And all of this sits just 60 miles from Manhattan, close enough to see the distant glow of the New York skyline, a world apart in every other way. A city that lost its soul to a wrecking ball is heartbreaking. But the next town lost the very industry that gave it life. And it happened to be the birthplace of American steel. Number 10. Braddock, Pennsylvania. Sitting on the banks of the Monongahela River, just east of Pittsburgh. In 1873, Andrew Carnegie chose Braddock as the site for his Edgar Thomson Steelworks. In 1889, Carnegie built his very first free public library in the world right here. A tunnel was built directly from the mill so that workers could enter a bathhouse in the basement, wash the soot off their bodies, and walk upstairs into the reading rooms. At its peak in the 1920s, Braddock had a population of roughly 20,000. Today, approximately 1,700 people remain, a 90% decline. The crack cocaine epidemic, combined with the collapse of the steel industry, nearly destroyed the community entirely. Entire streets of homes have been demolished. The buildings that remain often stand alone, surrounded by empty lots. The library that Andrew Carnegie built still stands and still operates. It is one of the few public institutions left. A town where Carnegie's first library still stands amid 90% population loss is a powerful image. But the next town lost something in a single afternoon that could never be rebuilt. Number 9. On May 31st, 1889, the South Fork Dam in Cambria County, Pennsylvania, collapsed. 20 million tons of water slammed into Johnstown at roughly 40 miles per hour. 2,209 people died. The dam had been owned by the South Fork Fishing and Hunting Club. Its members included Andrew Carnegie, Henry Clay Frick, and Andrew Mellon. They had modified the dam in ways that compromised its integrity. They had removed the discharge pipes to prevent fish from escaping the lake. They had lowered the dam's crest to accommodate their carriages, and when it failed, not a single member was held legally responsible. Not one. Johnstown rebuilt. Then it flooded again in 1936, and again in 1977, when another 40 people died. 3 catastrophic floods in less than a century. The population peaked at 67,000 in 1920. Today, it is approximately 18,000, a decline of more than 73%. A town destroyed by water at least had the chance to rebuild, but the next place is losing something that cannot be rebuilt. It is losing a culture that stretches back to West Africa. Number 8. Sapelo Island, Georgia, one of the barrier islands off the Georgia coast, accessible only by a state-run ferry. In the heart of the island sits a tiny community called Hog Hammock. It is one of the last remaining Gullah Geechee communities in the United States. The residents are descendants of enslaved West Africans brought to Sapelo to work plantations in the early 19th century. After emancipation, they stayed. They built a community rooted in West African traditions, including the ring shout, sweetgrass basket weaving, and a Creole dialect blending English with West African languages. At its peak, several hundred people lived here. Today, fewer than 50 remain. Rising property taxes and limited opportunities have hollowed out the population. Young people leave for the mainland and rarely return. There is no shop, no restaurant, and no medical facility. The community that has survived since slavery is now in danger of disappearing within a single generation. And with it would go one of the last living connections to a culture that crossed the Atlantic in chains. A community whose roots stretch back to West Africa, vanishing from a Georgia island, is devastating. But the next town was built by people who had survived something equally historic. Number 7. Princeville, North Carolina, sitting on low ground beside the Tar River. Princeville is the oldest town in the United States incorporated by formerly enslaved African Americans. It was chartered in 1885. The freed people who founded it settled on the only land they were permitted to occupy, the low-lying floodplain nobody else wanted. And the river has been punishing them ever since. In 1999, Hurricane Floyd submerged the entire town under 24 feet of water. Every home was destroyed or badly damaged. The population dropped from roughly 2,100 to around 1,200. In 2016, Hurricane Matthew hit again. Homes rebuilt just years earlier were flooded for the second time. Princeville is not just losing buildings, it is losing its memory. A town built by freed people that keeps being washed away is devastating. But the next place tells the story of an entire industrial class left behind. Number 6. Chester, Pennsylvania, 15 miles south of Philadelphia. The Sun Shipbuilding Yard launched more than 200 vessels during the Second World War. At its peak in 1950, the population was 66,000. Today, it is roughly 33,000, cut exactly in half. The poverty rate hovers around 33%. The city has been under state financial oversight since 1995. Drive through Chester and you pass block after block of abandoned row homes. And here is the most bitter detail. The Covanta waste incinerator sits in Chester, burning trash from wealthier surrounding communities. For decades, residents have fought this on environmental justice grounds, arguing that their town has become a dumping ground for people who would never accept such a facility in their own neighborhoods. Chester sits in the shadow of Philadelphia, close enough to commute and far enough to be completely ignored. A town 15 miles from a major city can feel invisible. But the next place sits deep in the Appalachian Mountains, and it holds some of the most alarming numbers in the entire country. Number 5. Welch, West Virginia, the county seat of McDowell County. In 1950, McDowell County was the leading coal-producing county in the United States. Nearly 100,000 people lived here. Miners earned some of the highest hourly wages in the nation. Then the machines came. One piece of equipment could replace 200 men. Today, fewer than 17,000 remain. That is an 83% collapse. McDowell County ranks dead last out of 3,142 counties in the United States for life expectancy. Males live an average of 63.5 years. That is 13 years below the national average. And life expectancy here is actually declining. The opioid crisis claimed an entire generation of parents. Children are being raised by grandparents. 1 in 3 households depends on food stamps. There is 1 traffic light in the entire county. The nearest grocery shop for some families is a 45-minute drive over 2 mountains. Betty Stepp, a 76-year-old resident of Anawalt, was asked how far she had to drive to buy milk. 45 minutes, she said, 2 mountains. Pastor Brad Davis hears the same thing from his congregations every week. People feel forgotten. When someone suggests they should just leave, he says the same thing. Why should we have to move? This is home. A county where life expectancy is declining in the wealthiest nation on earth is difficult to comprehend. But the next place had a population of 5, not 5,000. 5. Number 4. Millinocket, Maine. Nestled in the deep woods of northern Maine, at the foot of Mount Katahdin. Millinocket was built almost overnight by the Great Northern Paper Company in 1899. By the middle of the 20th century, roughly 7,700 people lived here, almost all dependent on the paper mill. The mill ran for more than a century. When it finally closed in 2008, it was as though someone pulled the plug on the entire community. The population has dropped to roughly 4,000. Shops closed. Young people left. Property values collapsed. A 3-bedroom house in Millinocket can be found for under $50,000. And yet Millinocket sits at the gateway to some of the most beautiful wilderness in the eastern United States. Hikers completing the Appalachian Trail pass through every year. They see the beauty. They rarely see the town behind it. A town built by a paper company and abandoned when the paper ran out is a story told across rural America. But the next place was abandoned by the government itself. Number 3. Centralia, Pennsylvania. On May 27, 1962, 5 volunteer firefighters set a landfill on fire. An unsealed opening allowed the fire to enter the abandoned coal mines beneath the town. It has been burning ever since. That was 63 years ago. The underground blaze reaches temperatures exceeding 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit. By the late 1970s, the reality became impossible to ignore. Carbon monoxide seeped into homes. In 1981, a 12-year-old boy named Todd Domboski was playing in his grandmother's backyard when a sinkhole 150 feet deep opened directly beneath him. His cousin grabbed his wrist and pulled him out. The federal government allocated $42 million to relocate residents. 500 buildings were demolished. The Postal Service revoked Centralia's zip code. As of the 2020 census, 5 people remain. They have been granted permission to stay until they die. One church, the Assumption of the Blessed Virgin Mary, still stands on solid rock above the fire and holds weekly services. Scientists estimate the fire could burn for another 250 years. The town that was once home to nearly 3,000 people is now a grid of empty streets sitting on top of an inferno that nobody can stop. A town sitting above a fire that will burn for centuries is an image difficult to forget. But the next place is sinking below. Number 2. Tangier Island, Virginia. 12 miles off the mainland in the middle of the Chesapeake Bay. You can only reach it by boat or by landing on a tiny airstrip. Captain John Smith first landed here in 1608. For over 250 years, the families of Tangier have made their living by crabbing and fishing. At its peak, roughly 1,300 people called this island home. The most recent census estimate puts the population at 240. That is a 30% drop from 2022 alone. The school had 38 students in the 2024 to 2025 school year, and just one graduating senior. His name is Lucas Thomas, and he told reporters he plans to stay on Tangier. That makes him an anomaly among the young people here. Since 1850, 67% of the island's landmass has disappeared. A peer-reviewed study estimates the island will convert to uninhabitable wetlands by 2051. Gravestones from a cemetery that once sat well inland now rest on the open beach. The residents speak a distinctive dialect, preserved by centuries of isolation. There are no cars. People get around on golf carts and mopeds. Physician assistant Inez Pruitt, whose family roots stretch back to the 1700s, was asked if she would ever leave. She shook her head before the question was finished. "Not going anywhere," she said. Mayor James Eskridge has said saving Tangier would cost roughly $300 million. So far, the island has received a fraction of that. Tangier Island is less than 100 miles from Washington, D.C., and yet it is disappearing while the world watches. An island community sinking into the Chesapeake Bay while the country looks the other way is a tragedy in motion. But our final destination may be the loneliest place of all. Number 1. Thurmond, West Virginia, deep in the New River Gorge. To reach Thurmond, you take a single narrow road that winds through dense forest before dropping down into the gorge itself. There is no mobile phone signal, no shop, no petrol station, no post office. 5 people live in Thurmond. In 1910, this was one of the wealthiest small towns in West Virginia. The Chesapeake and Ohio Railway made Thurmond a major freight hub, processing more revenue than Richmond or Cincinnati. The Dunglen Hotel reportedly hosted the longest-running poker game in American history, lasting 14 years without stopping. Saloons, hotels, and boarding houses lined both sides of the tracks. Then, coal declined. The railroad shifted operations. The population dropped from the hundreds to double digits, then to single digits. In 2021, the New River Gorge was designated as America's newest national park. Thurmond now sits within its boundaries. Tourists raft past on the river below. Some stop to photograph the preserved depot. Then they leave. The 5 people who live here stay behind. Thurmond is not dying. Thurmond has already died. What remains is not a town. It is a monument to how quickly a community can vanish when the industry that built it simply moves on. The poker game lasted 14 years. The town itself barely lasted a century. And now, 5 people live in the silence of a gorge where 1,000 once made their living in the loneliest town on the east coast of America. If you like this video, please subscribe. Make sure to watch the next video appearing on the screen.